Well, Casey, today we're going to talk about a forecast.
And that's separate from a fork cast, which is something different.
Yeah, that's what we call our end of the year predictions episode, isn't it?
I think so.
But today we're talking about something different, which is this new report called A.I. 2027. This is a report that I wrote about last week and that has gotten a lot of attention in AI circles and policy circles this week. It was produced by the AI Futures Project, a Berkeley-based nonprofit led by Daniel Kokotajlo, who listeners of this show may remember was a former OpenAI employee who left the company last year and became something of a whistleblower, warning about their reckless culture, as he called it, and is now spending his time trying to predict the future of AI.
Yeah, and of course, lots of people are trying to predict the future of AI, but what gives Daniel a lot of credibility here is that in 2021, he tried to predict what he thinks would look like about now, and he just got a lot of things right. And so when Daniel said, hey, I'm putting together a new report on what I think AI is going to look like in 2027, a lot of close AI observers said, oh, this is really something to read.
Yeah, and Daniel didn't just do this alone. He also partnered with a guy named Eli Lifland, who is an AI researcher and a very accomplished forecaster. He's won some forecasting competitions in the past. And the two of them, along with the rest of their group, and Scott Alexander, who writes the very popular Astral Codex 10 blog, put together this very detailed, what they call a scenario forecast. Essentially, it's a big report, a website. It's got some, sort of research backing it up, and it is basically represents their best attempt to kind of synthesize everything they think is likely to happen in AI over the next few years into a readable narrative.
Yeah, and if that sounds a little dull to you, I'm telling you, you should just go check this thing out. It's at ai-2027.com, and it's just super readable, and it blows through stuff that feels very familiar right now, like just sort of basic extrapolating from where we are today into getting to, 6 months, a year from now, the world starts to look very, very different, and there is a lot of research that they have to support why they think that is plausible.
Yeah, and I can imagine people reading this report or listening to us talking about it and say, well, that sounds like science fiction to me. And we should be clear. It is science fiction. This is a fictionalized narrative that they have put together, but I would say it is also grounded in a lot of empirical predictions that can be tested and confirmed or verified. It's also true that some science fiction ends up becoming reality, right? If you look at movies about AI from past decades, a lot of the things in those movies did end up actually being built. So I think this report, while it may not be 100% accurate, is at least represents a very rigorous and methodical attempt to sketch out what the future of AI might look like.
And here's my bet. If you put this conversation into a time capsule and revisited it in 2 years, in 2027, my guess is we're going to find that a good number of things in that scenario actually did come true.
And I hope we're still doing a podcast in 2 years. That'd be good.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So my forecast is that this is going to be a good conversation. Let's bring in Daniel Kokotajlo. Daniel Kokotajlo, welcome back to Hard Fork.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So you have just led this group that put together this giant scenario forecast, AI 2027. What was your goal?
So our goal was to predict the future using the medium of a concrete scenario. There is a small but exciting literature of attempts to predict the future of AI that use other methods, which is also very important. Things like, defining a capabilities milestone. Like, here's my definition of A.G.I. Here is my forecast for how long we'll have until A.G.I. based on these reasons and stuff. And that's great. And we've done that stuff before. We did a lot of that in the run up to this scenario. But we thought it would be helpful to have a actual concrete story that you can read. Part of the reason why we think this is important is that it forces you to think about everything and integrate it all into a coherent picture.
Well, I want to ask you a bit more about that. So, the first thing I want to say about AI 2027 is it's an extremely entertaining read. Like, it is as entertaining as most of the sci-fi that I have read. By the end of it, you get into scenarios where, humanity's survival is threatened. And so whether you think it's true or false, it is really engaging to read. But my understanding of your aim here is that there is something practical about what you were trying to do, right? Can you tell us about sort of the practical idea of going through this exercise?
Yeah, well, I mean, important background context. The CEOs of OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google DeepMind have all publicly stated that they're building A.G.I. and that even that they're building superintelligence, and that they think that they can succeed by the end of this decade. And that's a really big deal, and everyone needs to be paying attention to that. Like, I think a lot of people dismiss that as hype. It's a reasonable reaction to say, like, oh, they're just hyping their product. But it's not just the CEOs saying this, it's also the actual researchers at the companies. And it's not just people at the companies, it's also various independent people in academia and so forth. And then also, like, you don't just have to trust people's word for it. If you actually look at the evidence, it really does seem strikingly plausible that this could happen by the end of this decade. And then if it does happen, then things are going to go crazy in some way or other. It's hard to predict exactly how, but obviously if we do get super intelligent AGI, what happens next is going to look like sci-fi.
Right.
It will be like it'll be straight out of a sci-fi book, except that it will be actually happening.
You mentioned that if what the CEOs of tech companies say comes true, we will be living in a sci-fi world. And I think for a lot of people, they're content to sort of stop thinking there, right? They might be willing to admit, okay, yeah, if you invent superintelligence, things will probably be crazy, but like I'll cross that bridge when we come to it. You're sort of taking a different approach and saying like, no, you're going to want to start thinking right now about what it would be like if some of these claims start to come true.
Yeah.
So maybe we could get into what some of those claims are. Sketch out for us what you think is very likely to happen just within the next couple of years.
Well, I wouldn't say very likely. I should express my uncertainty, right? So past discussion often focuses on a single milestone, like artificial general intelligence or superintelligence. We broke it down into a couple different milestones, which we call superhuman coders, superhuman AI researchers, superintelligent AI researchers, and then broad superintelligence. So we sort of like make our predictions for each of these stages. Even the very first one, I'm only like 50% confident that it'll happen by the end of 2027. So I have 50% chance that 2027 will end and there still won't be any autonomous superhuman coding agents. So I am uncertain, but
it's a coin flip. We might also be living in a world where, yes, you do have
Exactly. So 50% chance we do have fully autonomous artificial intelligences that can basically do the job of the cracked engineers by 2027. And then okay, well, it's the next milestone after that. After that comes automating the full AI research process instead of just the coding, because AI research is more than just coding. And how long does it take to get to that? Well, we have our guesses, and in our scenario, it happens like 6 months later, Yeah, so in our story, get the superhuman coders, use them to go even faster to get to the superhuman AI researchers that are able to do the whole loop. That really kicks things off, and now you're going much faster. How much faster? We say 25 times faster for the algorithmic progress, at least. Of course, your compute scale-up is not going any faster at all because you still have the same amount of compute, but you're able to do the sort of algorithmic progress 25 times faster. Then you start getting to the superhuman regime. So you start getting systems that are just like qualitatively superior to the best humans at stuff. And they're also probably discovering new paradigms. So we depict them going through multiple paradigm shifts over the course of the second half of 2027, ending up with something that's just vastly superior to humans in every dimension by the end.
Yeah. Let me just sort of pause and maybe underline a couple of things there. I think, most people might not understand why the big AI labs are obsessed with automating coding, right? Most people are not software engineers, so they kind of don't care how much of it is automated. But by the time you get to software that is mostly writing itself, it unlocks this other world of possibilities. And you just sort of sketch out a vision where once we get to a point where the sort of AI coding systems are better than almost every human engineer, or maybe every human engineer, then this other thing becomes possible, which is now you can just set this thing to work trying to figure out how to build AI itself, right? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Basically, I'd break it down into two stages. So I think the coding is separate from the complete automation, as I previously mentioned. I think that I expect to see systems that are able to do all the coding extremely well, but might lack research taste, for example. They might lack good judgment about what types of experiments to run. And so that's why they can't completely automate the research process. And then you have to make a new system or continually train the old system so that it gets that taste, it gets that judgment. Similarly, they might lack coordination ability. They might be not so good at working together in large organizations of thousands of copies, at least initially. But then you fix that and you come up with new methods and you do additional training environments and get them good at that sort of thing. And that's what we depict happening over the first half of 2027. And we depict it happening in only half a year because it goes faster, because they've got all the coding down pat. And so even though humans are still directing the whole process, they just give orders to the coding agents and they quickly make everything actually work.
Right.
And then, halfway through the year, they've succeeded in making new training runs that train the skills that the AIs were missing. So now they're not just coding agents; they are able to do the research taste as well. They're able to come up with the new ideas. They're able to come up with hypotheses and test them, and they're able to work together in big sort of like hive mind clusters of thousands and thousands of them. And that's when things really kick off.
Right.
That's when it really starts to accelerate.
In your scenario, you have this sort of choose your own adventure ending, where after this thing you call the intelligence explosion, where the superhuman AI coders get into AI R&D and they start automating the process of building better and better AIs, you sort of have two buttons that you can click, and one of them sort of unspools the good place ending, where we decide to slow down AI development and really get these things under control and solve alignment. And then the red button, you push that, and it goes into this very dark dystopian scenario where we lose control of AI. They start deceiving and scheming against us, and ultimately maybe we all die. Why did you decide to give people the option of choosing one of those two endings rather than just sketching what you believe to be the most probable outcome?
So we did start by sketching what we believe to be the most probable outcome, and it's the race ending, the one that ends with the misaligned AIs in control of everything. So we did that first. And then we were like, well, this is kind of depressing and sad. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't get to talk about because of that. And so we wanted to then have a different ending that ended differently. In fact, we wanted to have like a whole spread of different possible outcomes, but we were limited by time and labor, and we were only able to pull together one other outcome, which is the one that we depicted in the slowdown ending. So in the slowdown ending, they solve the alignment issues, and they actually get AIs that are actually, what they say on their tin. They're not faking it. They just actually have the goals and values that were put into them, or that the company was trying to train into them. It takes them a couple months to like sort that out. That's why it's a slowdown. They had to like pivot a lot of their compute and energy towards figuring that stuff out. But they succeed. And so then in that ending, we still have this crazy arms race with China, and we still have this crazy geopolitical crisis. And in fact, it still ends in a similar sort of way with this massive arms buildup on both sides, this massive integration into the economy, and then ultimately a peace treaty.
I'm curious, Daniel, if the events of the last week in Washington, the tariffs, this looming trade war with China, have affected your forecast at all.
I mean, we've been iteratively improving it, but like the core structure of it was basically done a few months ago. So this is all new to us and wasn't really part of the forecast. How would it change things? Well, if the trade war continues and causes a recession and stuff like that, it might just generally slow the pace of AI progress, but not by much, I think. Like, say it makes compute 30% more expensive so that the companies are able to buy 30% less of it. Maybe that would translate to like a 15% reduction in overall research velocity over the next few years, which would mean that the milestones that we talk about happen like a few months later instead of when they do. So the story would still be basically the same.
So one of the things I think is most interesting about your project is the bets and bounties section, where you are going to pay people for finding errors in your work, for convincing you to change your mind on key points, or for drafting some alternate scenarios. So talk to me a little bit about how that became part of this project.
So like, I come from the sort of rationalist community background, which is big into making predictions and making bets, putting your money where your mouth is. So I have a sort of aesthetic interest in doing that sort of thing. But then also, specifically, one of the goals of this project is to get people to think more about this stuff and to, do more scenario forecasting along the lines of what we've done. We're really hoping that people will counter this with their own reasonably detailed, alternative pathways that represents their vision of what's coming. And so we're going to give out a few $1,000s of prizes to try to mildly incentivize that. And then as for the bounties thing, already we've gotten dozens of people being like, you say this, but like, isn't this a typo? Or like, this feels wrong. And so I have a backlog of things to process, but I'm going to get through it. I'm going to pay out the little payments and fix all the little bugs and stuff like that. And I'm just quite heartwarmed to see that level of engagement.
And have you like taken any bets on like different scenarios so far?
I think so far I've done like one or two, but mostly there's just a backlog I need to work through.
Now, Daniel, you said you've been getting some good responses from people at the AI companies to this scenario forecast. I did a bunch of calling around when I was writing about this, and after we spoke, I talked to a bunch of different people, both in the AI research community and outside of it. And I would say the most frequent reaction I got was just kind of disbelief. One person I talked to, a prominent AI researcher, said he thought it was an April Fool's joke when I first showed him this scenario because it just sounded so outlandish. You know, you've got Chinese espionage and the models going rogue and the superhuman coders, and like it all just seemed fantastical. And it was almost like they didn't even think it was worth engaging with because it was so far out. I'm curious if you've gotten much of that kind of reaction and what your response is.
Well, go write your own damn scenario then. I would say you either will write a scenario that doesn't seem outlandish, which I will completely tear apart as unrealistic and just assuming basically that AI progress hits a wall, or you'll write a scenario that does feel very outlandish, but perhaps in different ways than ours do. Again, like, are they actually going to get to AGI and superintelligence by the end of this decade? If so, you can't possibly write that in a way that's not outlandish. It's just a question of like, which outlandish thing are you going to write? And if you think maybe this is not going to happen and it's going to hit a wall, yeah, that's possible too. I think that's reasonable. I don't think it's the most likely outcome. Like, I do actually think that probably by the end of this decade, we're going to have superintelligence.
And say more about that, because, I assume that a lot of our listeners either truly think that it will hit a wall, or they're just sort of counting on it hitting a wall so as not to have to reckon with any of the scenarios that you describe.
Right.
So, like, what is your message to the person that's just like, it'll probably hit a wall?
I mean, I don't know, read the literature. Like, there's...
These people are not going to read the literature. They listen to podcasts specifically so they don't have to read the literature.
Yeah, fair. Well, I could point to specific parts of the literature, like benchmarks, for example, and the trends on them. So I would say the benchmarks used to be terrible, but they're actually becoming a lot better. Meter, in particular, has these agentic coding benchmarks where they actually give AI systems access to some GPUs and say, have fun. You have like 8 hours to make progress on this research problem. Good luck. And then they measure how good they are compared to human researchers given the same setup. And, line goes up on the graph. It seems like in a year or two, they'll have AIs that are able to just autonomously do 8-hour-long ML research tasks of a wide variety of such tasks, on these sorts of things. And that's not AGI, that's not superintelligence, but that is maybe the first milestone that I was talking about, superhuman coder, right? So I point to those sorts of trends. And then separately, I would also just do the appeal to authority. Like, if you're not going to read the literature, if you're not going to if you're not going to sort of form your own opinion about this, and you're still just deferring to what other people think, well, then I will say, yeah, there's a bunch of naysayers out there who are saying this is all never going to happen, it's just fantasy. But also, there's a bunch of extremely credible people with amazing track records, both inside the companies and outside the companies, who are, in fact, taking this extremely seriously.
Yeah. I also want to read
including our scenario. Like, Joshua Bengio, for example, read an early draft of our thing and liked it and gave us some feedback on it. And then we put a quote from him at the top saying, everyone should read this. It's plausible.
He's a pioneering AI researcher.
Another genre of criticism I've heard of this forecast is from people who are just questioning the idea that if you get AIs that are superhuman at coding, they will kind of be able to bootstrap their way to general intelligence. And I just want to read you a quote from an email that I got from David Autor, who is a very well-known economist at MIT. And I had asked him to look at the scenario and sort of react to it. And with a particular eye on, like, what might this be missing as far as how it sort of assumes this sort of easy and fast jump from superhuman coding to something like AGI. And I'll just read you what he said. He said, LLMs and their ilk are superpowered incarnations of one incredibly important and powerful part of our cognition. The reason I say we're not on a glide path to AGI is that simply taking this capability to 11 does not substitute for the parts that are still missing. I think that humanity will get to AGI eventually. I'm not a dualist. I just don't believe that swimming faster and faster allows you to fly. What is your reaction to that?
I agree. We depict this in the course of the story. So if you read AI 2027, They have something that's like LLMs, but with a lot more reinforcement learning to do long horizon tasks. And that is what counts as the first superhuman coder. So it's already somewhat different from the systems of today, but it's still broadly similar. It's still sort of maybe the same fundamental architecture, just a lot more training, a lot more scaling up, and in particular, a lot more training specifically on long horizon agentic coding tasks. But that's not itself AGI, I agree. That's just the superhuman coder that you get early on. And then you have to go through several more like paradigm shifts to get to actual superintelligence. And we depict that happening over the course of 2027. So a key thing that I think that everyone needs to be thinking about is this takeoff speeds variable. How much faster does the research go when you've reached the first milestone? And how much faster does the research go when you reach the second milestone, and so forth? And we are, of course, uncertain about this, like we are about many things. We say in the scenario that we could easily imagine it being 5 times slower than we depict and taking sort of like 5 years instead of 1 year. But also we could imagine it being 5 times faster than we depict and taking like 2 months, So we want to do a lot more research on that, obviously. If you want to know where our numbers are coming from, go to the website. There's a tab that you can click on that has a bunch of sort of like back of the envelope calculations and little mini essays where we like generated the quantitative estimates that are the skeleton of the story.
One other piece of criticism I've seen of this project that I wanted to ask you about was from a researcher at Anthropic named Saffron Huang, who argued on X that she thought that your approach in AI 2027 was highly counterproductive. Basically, that you were in danger of creating a self-fulfilling prophecy by making these sort of scary outcomes very legible, by sort of burying some assumptions, that you were essentially making the bad scenario that you're worried about more likely to actually happen. What do you make of that?
I'm quite worried about that as well. And this is something we've been like fretting about since day one of the project. First of all, there is a long history of this sort of thing seeming to happen in the field of artificial general intelligence research. Most notably, Eliezer Yudkowsky, who is the sort of like, I don't know, father of like worrying about AGI, at least in this generation. People, Alan Turing also worried about it, but like, anyhow, Sam Altman specifically tweeted, you know this tweet? Yeah, Sam specifically said, like, hats off to Eliezer Yudkowsky for, like, raising awareness about AGI. It's happening much faster now because of his doomsaying, because it's caused a bunch of people to, like, pay more attention to the possibility and to, like, start investing in these companies and so forth. So I was sort of like twisting the knife at him because he obviously doesn't want this to happen faster. He thinks we need more time to prepare and make it safe and so forth. But it does seem like there's been this effect where people talking about how powerful and scary AGI could be has maybe caused it to come a little bit faster and caused people to like wake up and race harder towards it. And similarly, I'm worried about causing something like that with AI 2027. One of the like subplots in AI 2027 is this whole like concentration of power issue of like who gets to control the army of superintelligences, right? And in the race ending, it's sort of a moot question because the army of superintelligences is just pretending to be controlled and so is not actually listening to anyone when it counts. But in the slowdown ending, they do actually align the AIs. And so they are actually going to do what they're told. And then who gets to say that, right? And the answer in our slowdown ending is the oversight committee, which is this like ad hoc group of people that is some CEOs and the president who get together and like share power over the army of superintelligences. But what I would like to see is something more democratic than that, something where the power is more distributed. I'm also afraid that it could be less democratic than that. Like at least we get an oligarchy with this committee, but like it could very easily end up a dictatorship where one person has absolute control over the army of superintelligences. This is yet another example of like how I'm trying to like not have the self-fulfilling prophecy happen. Like I don't want people to read this and be like, I'm a CEO. I
can make a lot of money by building the misaligned AI.
Maybe, yeah. So, but all that being said,
yes. So any of our evil villain listeners out there steepling your fingers in your lair under a mountain, knock it off.
Yeah. So all that being said, we are taking a gamble that, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Like. The best way forward is to just generally tell the world about what we think is coming and hope that even though many people will react to that in exactly the wrong ways, enough people will react to that in the right ways that overall it will be good. Because I am tired of the alternative of like, hush, hush, keep everything secret, do backroom negotiations and hope that we get like the right people in the right rooms at the right time and that they make the right decisions. I think that that is kind of doomed. So I'm sort of placing my faith in humanity and telling it as I see it and hoping that insofar as I'm correct, people will wake up in time and, overall that the outcome will be better.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, guys.